There are two kinds of people in this world: those who spend their lives trying to control everything around them, and those who have discovered something far more powerful than control. The first group is exhausted, always pushing, always managing, always at the mercy of how people respond, how circumstances unfold, how the world decides to behave on any given day. Their peace depends entirely on outer conditions cooperating. And outer conditions rarely cooperate consistently enough to produce the kind of inner steadiness they are searching for. The second group has discovered something that the first group spends a lifetime missing: that the only thing you ever truly control is what happens inside you. Not what happens to you, not what other people do or say or decide, not the economy or the weather or the thousand circumstances of daily life that arrive without asking permission, but your response to all of it, your judgment about it, your decision about what it means and what it calls for. Your choice about where to place your attention and your energy and your inner conviction. This discovery did not originate in a modern self-help book. It did not emerge from a productivity framework or a mindset seminar. It was worked out with extraordinary precision and extraordinary courage by a man who had every reason to believe that circumstances controlled everything. His name was Epictetus. He was born a slave. He lived most of his early life without freedom, without property, without the outer conditions that most people consider essential to any kind of genuine well-being. And from within those conditions, he developed a philosophy of inner freedom so complete, so practical, and so immediately applicable that it has outlasted every empire and every ideology of the 2,000 years since he first taught it. That philosophy is this book, the Enchiridion. It is not about becoming cold or detached or indifferent to the conditions of life. It is about developing the inner strength to engage fully with life from a position of genuine inner stability, rather than from the anxious fragility of someone whose peace depends entirely on outer conditions behaving as desired. In the chapters that follow, Epictetus will show you exactly how to do that, not through theory, through practice, through the precise, daily, disciplined application of principles that have been tested against the hardest conditions human life can produce and found to hold. This is the book that Marcus Aurelius studied. That shaped the thinking of some of the most effective leaders, thinkers, and human beings in history. That is experiencing a profound revival in the 21st century precisely because the problems it addresses have never been more urgent. The world will not slow down, the demands will not decrease. The uncertainty will not resolve itself into the comfortable predictability that the anxious mind keeps hoping for, but you can become someone who does not need it to. That is what Epictetus teaches, and it begins right now. The dichotomy of control, everything in your life falls into one of two categories: things that are up to you, and things that are not up to you. This distinction sounds simple. It is perhaps the simplest idea in this entire book, but Epictetus considered it the foundation of everything. The single most important understanding a human being can develop. The beginning of genuine inner freedom and the end of the particular kind of suffering that comes from trying to control what was never within your control to begin with. Things that are up to you include your judgments, your intentions, your desires, your responses, your values, and your choices about where to place your attention and your energy. These things, and only these things, are genuinely yours. They are within your sphere of genuine influence. You can work with them, develop them, direct them, choose them deliberately rather than simply following wherever impulse and habit lead. Things that are not up to you include your body, your reputation, your property, your relationships, other people's opinions and decisions and behavior, the outcomes of your efforts, the circumstances of your birth and your situation, and essentially everything that exists in the outer world beyond the boundary of your own inner life. These things are not yours in the relevant sense. You may influence some of them some of the time, but you do not control them. They follow their own laws and their own logic, and will do what they will do regardless of how much energy you invest in trying to make them behave as you prefer. Most human suffering, Epictetus says, comes from this single confusion, from treating things that are not up to you as though they were, from investing your peace, your self-worth, your sense of what is possible and what is good in conditions that are inherently outside your genuine control, and then experiencing the inevitable disappointment, frustration, anxiety, and suffering that follows when those conditions fail to cooperate as you require them to. The person who requires favorable outer conditions in order to feel at peace will never be consistently at peace. Because outer conditions are never consistently favorable, they fluctuate, they disappoint, they change without warning and without regard for what you need from them. Anchoring your inner well-being to outer conditions is anchoring it to something that will pull it under the moment the tide turns. The person who has learned to find their inner stability in what is genuinely up to them, in the quality of their own judgments and intentions and responses, is anchored to something that cannot be taken away by any outer circumstance. Their peace does not depend on the world cooperating. It depends on themselves, and themselves is the one thing that is always, in principle, within their genuine influence. Epictetus is not saying that outer conditions do not matter. He is not advocating for indifference to the world or the people in it. Your inner life, develop those with full commitment and full seriousness, hold everything else lightly. That is the beginning of genuine freedom. Desire and aversion, most people spend their entire lives wanting things they do not have and avoiding things they do not want. This sounds obvious. It sounds like simply being human. But Epictetus points to something in this ordinary pattern of wanting and avoiding that is causing an extraordinary amount of unnecessary suffering. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The problem is not that you have desires. Desire is natural. It is part of being alive. The problem is where those desires are directed, what you are wanting and what you are trying to avoid, and specifically whether those things are within the category of what is genuinely up to you or within the category of what is not. When your desire is directed at something that is not fully within your control, you have created a situation in which your inner well-being is hostage to something that may or may not cooperate. You want the promotion. You want the relationship to work out. You want the business to succeed. You want people to respect you and approve of you and treat you fairly. These are natural human desires. There is nothing wrong with them as preferences. But when they become the conditions of your inner peace, when your sense of well-being rises and falls with whether or not they are fulfilled, you have surrendered the only thing that is actually yours to something that was never actually yours to begin with. Epictetus prescribes a specific and demanding reorientation. Direct your desire toward what is genuinely up to you, toward the development of your own character, toward the quality of your own judgments and responses, toward becoming the kind of person whose inner life is genuinely excellent regardless of what outer conditions happen to be present, and hold your preferences about outer conditions lightly, not suppressing them, not pretending they do not exist, but maintaining a clear inner distinction between what you genuinely prefer and what you require for your peace. You can prefer success without requiring it. You can work toward a goal without making your inner stability conditional on achieving it. You can care about outcomes without being destroyed by outcomes that disappoint. This distinction is everything. The person who merely prefers favorable outcomes can engage with the full energy and the full commitment of genuine effort, and then receive whatever arrives with genuine equanimity. They gave everything the effort deserved. The outcome is what it is. Their inner stability was never conditional on the outcome, so it remains intact regardless of what the outcome turns out to be. The person who requires favorable outcomes lives in constant anxiety during the effort and in devastation or relief depending on the result. Their inner life is entirely at the mercy of something they do not fully control. Epictetus also addresses aversion with equal precision. Most people direct their aversion at things in the outer world. At poverty, at illness, at failure, at the disapproval of others, at the thousand circumstances they do not want to encounter. And when those circumstances arrive anyway, as they inevitably sometimes do, the aversion produces suffering in direct proportion to its intensity. The reorientation Epictetus prescribes is to direct aversion away from outer circumstances and toward the only things that are genuinely worth avoiding, which are the failures of your own inner life, your own poor judgments, your own compromises of character, your own failures of genuine response to the circumstances life presents. These are things worth avoiding with genuine seriousness, because they are within your genuine control. And because failing at them represents a genuine diminishment of what you actually are rather than simply an unwanted change in outer conditions. Redirect desire inward, redirect aversion inward, and watch how much of the suffering that felt inevitable begins to dissolve. Playing your role, you did not choose the circumstances of your birth. You did not select your family, your country, your body, your early advantages or disadvantages, the particular hand that life dealt you at the beginning. These things arrived without your consent and without your input. And for most people, they become either the foundation of entitlement or the source of resentment. Either a reason to expect special treatment or a reason to feel that life is fundamentally unfair. Epictetus had no patience for either response, not because he was indifferent to circumstance. He understood circumstance better than almost anyone. He had been a slave. He knew what it meant to have almost nothing within your control. And from within those conditions, he arrived at an understanding of human life that made the complaints of the free and the comfortable seem almost absurd by comparison. His understanding was this: life assigns you a role, not the role you would necessarily have chosen. Not the role that seems most fair or most suited to your particular preferences, but a role, a specific set of circumstances, capacities, relationships, and conditions within which your particular life is to be lived. And the question that determines everything about the quality of that life is not whether the role is the one you would have chosen. It is whether you play it with full commitment and genuine excellence. Think of an actor in a play. The actor does not write the script, does not choose the character, does not determine the circumstances the character faces or the conditions the character must navigate. These things are given. What belongs entirely to the actor is the quality of the performance. The commitment, the craft, the genuine engagement with the role as it actually is rather than as the actor might prefer it to be. An actor who spends the performance wishing they had been cast differently is not acting. They are complaining. And the performance suffers in direct proportion to the energy invested in the complaint rather than the role. Your life is the performance. Your circumstances are the role as written. And the quality of your engagement with that role, the genuine commitment and genuine excellence you bring to the specific circumstances you have actually been given, is the only thing that was ever truly yours to determine. Epictetus extends this idea in a direction that carries particular practical weight. He says that playing your role with full commitment does not mean passive acceptance of every condition. It does not mean refusing to work toward better circumstances, or declining to use every genuine capacity available to you in pursuit of meaningful goals. It means engaging fully and excellently with what is actually present rather than withholding genuine engagement until circumstances become what you would prefer them to be. The person who withholds full engagement until conditions improve rarely finds that conditions improve. Because full engagement is itself one of the primary conditions through which circumstances change. The person who brings genuine commitment and genuine excellence to the role as it currently is creates the conditions from which the role can develop into something more. Half-hearted engagement with present circumstances in the hope of better future circumstances is a strategy that reliably produces neither. Full engagement with present circumstances, with the quality and the commitment that genuine excellence requires, is what creates the future that half-hearted waiting was hoping for. Play the role you have been given. Play it with everything you have. That is the only performance that counts. Judgment, nothing disturbs you. That is not a motivational statement. It is a precise philosophical claim that Epictetus considered one of the most important truths a human being can internalize. Nothing that happens in the outer world disturbs you directly. What disturbs you is your judgment about what happened, your interpretation of it, your decision about what it means and what it says about you and what it requires of you. The event itself is neutral. The disturbance comes entirely from the layer of judgment you place on top of it. This is one of the most radical ideas in the entire Stoic tradition, and it is also one of the most immediately practical. Because if the disturbance comes from the judgment rather than the event, then changing the judgment changes the experience. Not by pretending the event did not happen. Not by suppressing genuine feeling, but by examining honestly whether the judgment you have applied to the event is actually accurate, whether it is serving you, whether it is the only possible interpretation or simply the habitual one. Epictetus uses a simple example that cuts straight to the point. Someone insults you. You feel the heat of anger or the sting of humiliation rise immediately. It feels as though the insult caused those feelings directly. As though the other person's words reached into your inner life and produced the disturbance without any mediation. But examine what actually happened. Words were spoken. Those words reached your ears, and then, in the space between hearing and feeling, a judgment occurred. A rapid, largely unconscious assessment that decided those words were harmful, that they threatened something important, that they deserved the response of anger or humiliation. That judgment, not the words themselves, produced the disturbance. A person with a different relationship to their own worth and their own stability might have heard exactly the same words and responded with curiosity or amusement or simple indifference. Not because they were suppressing their feelings, but because their judgment about the words was different. And because their judgment was different, their experience was genuinely different. The words were the same. The experience was completely different because the judgment was different. This is what Epictetus means when he says that it is not events that disturb people, but their judgments about events. The practical implication is both challenging and liberating. Challenging because it removes the comfortable habit of blaming outer circumstances for inner states. If your disturbance comes from your judgment rather than from the event, then your disturbance is your responsibility. Not the responsibility of the person who acted badly, or the circumstance that arrived inconveniently, or the world that failed to cooperate. Yours. Which means you cannot resolve it by changing the outer situation. You can only resolve it by examining, and if necessary, changing the judgment. Liberating, because it means that your inner life is not at the mercy of whatever the outer world decides to do today. If disturbance comes from judgment, and judgment is within the category of things that are up to you, then inner peace is always in principle available regardless of outer conditions. Not as a performance of contentment you do not feel, but as the genuine result of bringing honest and disciplined examination to the judgments through which you interpret your experience. This is not a skill that develops overnight. Habitual judgments run fast and deep. The reactive interpretation of events is so immediate and so automatic that it takes genuine practice to create even a small space of awareness between the event and the response. But that space, however small it begins, is where genuine freedom lies. In the moment of awareness between what happens and how you judge it lies the entire territory of genuine human agency. Develop that space, examine your judgments honestly, and discover that far less of what happens to you has the power to disturb you than you previously believed. Illness, death, and loss, the things you fear most, have already been decided, not by you, not by your effort or your caution or your careful management of risk, by the nature of things, by the simple and unavoidable fact that everything in the physical world is temporary. Every body will weaken. Every person you love will one day be gone. Every possession, every achievement, every condition that currently feels essential to your well-being will at some point change or disappear. Most people know this. And most people spend enormous energy not thinking about it. Epictetus thought about it directly, deliberately, daily, not from morbidity or despair, but from the clear-eyed recognition that genuine inner freedom requires an honest relationship with the actual conditions of human life, including the ones that are most uncomfortable to acknowledge. He begins with illness. When your body is unwell, two things are happening simultaneously. The illness itself, which is in the category of things not up to you, and your judgment about the illness, which is entirely in the category of things that are up to you. The illness is a fact. It arrived without your consent. It will follow its own course according to its own laws regardless of how you feel about it. Fighting that fact, resenting it, spending your inner energy raging against the reality of physical vulnerability does not change the illness. It simply adds a layer of unnecessary suffering on top of the unavoidable one. What is up to you is how you engage with the illness, whether you take the practical steps available to address it, whether you maintain the quality of your inner life and your judgments and your genuine engagement with what is still possible even within the constraints the illness imposes. Whether you allow it to take only what it actually takes rather than surrendering everything, including your inner stability, to something that has no claim on your inner life regardless of what it does to your body. Epictetus applies the same reasoning to death. Death is the most certain fact of human existence. Every person who has ever lived has died or will die. This is not a tragedy unique to you. It is the condition of being human. And spending your life in anxious avoidance of the fact of death, in the constant low-level dread that most people maintain toward the thing they cannot prevent, is spending your life in unnecessary suffering about something that the suffering itself cannot change. The Stoic response to death is not indifference. It is honest acknowledgement combined with the deliberate choice not to allow the fact of mortality to diminish the quality of engagement with the life that is actually present. Death will come when it comes. Until it does, there is life to be lived with genuine commitment and genuine excellence. Epictetus extends this to loss of every kind. When something is taken from you, whether it is a possession, a relationship, a position, a reputation, or any other condition that you valued, the loss is real. The grief that accompanies it is natural and human and not to be suppressed or dismissed. Epictetus is not asking you to feel nothing. He is asking you to remember, in the midst of the genuine feeling, that what was lost was never unconditionally yours. It was given to you for a time, enjoyed for a time, and then returned to the source from which it came. The appropriate response to loss is not the desperate suffering of someone who believed they owned what they never truly owned, but the genuine grief of someone who loved what they had while they had it, and can release it when the time for release arrives. Nothing is lost that was truly yours. Because what is truly yours cannot be taken the opinions of others. There is a prison that has no walls and no locks. Most people live inside it their entire lives without ever realizing they are imprisoned. They make their decisions from within it. They shape their ambitions around it. They silence their genuine voice, abandon their genuine direction, and betray their genuine values repeatedly and consistently in order to maintain their position within it. That prison is the need for the approval of others. Epictetus considered this one of the most destructive forces in human life, not because other people's opinions are unimportant, but because making your inner peace conditional on those opinions is surrendering the only territory that was ever genuinely yours to something that was never genuinely within your control. Other people's opinions are in the category of things not up to you. This is worth sitting with carefully. Because it is not merely a philosophical point. It is a practical description of how opinions actually work. You cannot control what other people think about you. You cannot manage it, engineer it, guarantee it, or reliably produce it through any combination of effort and strategy. People will form their opinions based on their own conditioning, their own values, their own history, their own fears and preferences and blind spots. Two people can observe exactly the same action and arrive at completely opposite assessments of it. The action did not determine the opinion. The observer's own inner life determined the opinion, which means that adjusting your behavior in order to secure approval is adjusting your behavior to influence something that does not actually respond reliably to what you do. It responds to who the observer already is. And who the observer already is has nothing to do with you. Epictetus draws a practical conclusion from this that is both liberating and demanding. If the opinions of others are not up to you, then they are not your proper business. Your proper business is the quality of your own judgments, your own intentions, your own character, and your own actions. Whether those things generate approval or disapproval from any particular observer is a consequence you can prefer but cannot require. And making your inner stability conditional on a consequence you cannot require is the source of the imprisonment. The person who acts from genuine inner conviction, who makes decisions based on their own honest assessment of what is right and what is true rather than on the anticipated reactions of observers, is free in a way that the approval seeker never is. Their peace does not rise and fall with the reviews. It is grounded in something that external opinion cannot touch. This does not mean indifference to the legitimate feedback of people whose judgment is genuinely worth considering. Epictetus is not advocating for arrogance or the dismissal of all external perspective. Genuine wisdom includes the capacity to learn from honest criticism and to take seriously the considered assessments of people with genuine insight. But there is an enormous difference between genuinely considering the perspective of someone whose judgment you respect and making your inner peace hostage to the approval of everyone whose opinion you encounter. The first is wisdom. The second is imprisonment. Epictetus also addresses something about the pursuit of reputation that carries particular practical weight. He says that the person who pursues reputation as a primary goal has chosen the most unreliable and most exhausting path available, because reputation is entirely in the hands of others. It can be built through years of genuine effort and destroyed in moments by forces entirely outside your control. Anchoring your sense of worth and your sense of achievement to something so inherently unstable is building your inner life on ground that will shift without warning. The alternative is not indifference to how you are perceived. It is the grounding of your sense of worth in something that cannot be taken by a shift in public opinion, in the quality of your own character, in the consistency of your own genuine effort, in the integrity of your own inner life. These things are yours, completely and unconditionally yours, and no opinion can touch them. Relationships and expectations. Every disappointment in human relationship has the same origin, not betrayal, not incompatibility, not the fundamental difficulty of two different people trying to share a life or a friendship or a working partnership. Those things are real, and they are sometimes genuinely painful. But they are not the primary source of the suffering that most people experience in their relationships with others. The primary source is expectation, specifically the expectation that other people will behave in the ways you need them to behave in order for your inner life to remain stable, that they will be reliable when you need reliability, consistent when you need consistency, understanding when you need understanding, fair when you need fairness, and that when they fail to meet these needs, as they inevitably sometimes will, because they are human beings following their own inner logic rather than instruments designed to fulfill your requirements, something has gone genuinely wrong that justifies your disturbance. Epictetus examines this pattern with the precision it deserves. He is not saying that other people's behavior toward you is irrelevant. He is not saying that genuine harm done by one person to another should be met with indifference. He is making a more specific and more practical point about where the suffering in relationships actually originates and what can genuinely be done about it. When you make your inner peace conditional on another person's behavior, you have placed your peace in their hands. And their hands were not designed to hold it. They are too busy holding their own peace, managing their own fears, following their own conditioning, navigating their own inner life. They cannot reliably hold yours as well, not because they do not care about you, but because it is not possible for one human being to consistently fulfill the inner requirements of another. The project is inherently impossible. The suffering that follows from this impossibility is not evidence that the relationship has failed. It is evidence that an impossible requirement was placed on it. Epictetus prescribes a reorientation that transforms the quality of every relationship it is genuinely applied to. Engage fully with the people in your life. Love them genuinely. Care about their well-being. Invest real energy and real commitment in the relationships that matter to you. But hold your inner peace in your own hands rather than placing it in theirs. Make your stability conditional on the quality of your own responses rather than on the reliability of their behavior. This is not emotional withdrawal. It is not the cold detachment of someone who has decided not to care in order to avoid being hurt. It is something considerably more demanding and considerably more rewarding than either of those. It is the genuine engagement of someone who is fully present in the relationship without being at the mercy of it, who cares deeply without requiring specific behaviors as the condition of their inner stability. Epictetus also addresses something about expectations that is worth examining carefully. He says that when someone behaves badly toward you, the question worth asking is not why did they do this to me? It is what in my understanding of this person led me to expect something different, because people behave consistently with who they are. When their behavior surprises or disappoints you, the surprise is usually not about their behavior. It is about the gap between who they actually are and who you needed them to be. Seeing people clearly, as they actually are rather than as you need them to be, is one of the most genuinely loving things you can do in any relationship. Because it allows you to engage with the real person rather than with the version of them that your expectations have constructed. It also, as a direct consequence, eliminates an enormous amount of unnecessary disappointment. The person in front of you is who they are. Engage with that person. Not with the person you needed them to be. Obstacles and adversity. The obstacle is not in your way. It is your way. This idea, which has become one of the most quoted expressions of Stoic philosophy in the modern world, originates in the precise understanding of adversity that Epictetus laid out, and that Marcus Aurelius later developed into one of the central practices of his own inner life. Most people experience obstacles as interruptions, as unwanted intrusions into the smooth progress toward their goals. Something was going well and then something got in the way. The obstacle is the problem. Remove the obstacle and things can proceed as intended. But Epictetus points to something in this ordinary experience of adversity that reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what obstacles actually are and what they are actually for. Every obstacle you encounter contains within it exactly the material needed for the development of the capacities that the next stage of your life will require. Not sometimes, not occasionally, every time. The specific nature of the obstacle, the particular challenge it presents, the precise demands it makes on your judgment and your character and your inner resources, is never random. It is always exactly calibrated to the edge of what you are currently capable of. Which means that the obstacle is not preventing your development. It is your development, in the only form that genuine development ever takes, which is contact with genuine resistance. A muscle that is never challenged does not grow. It maintains at best and atrophies at worst. The challenge is not the enemy of the muscle. It is the condition of its growth. Remove all resistance and you remove all development. Your character works by the same principle. Every obstacle that demands genuine response, that requires you to reach beyond your current habitual level of patience or courage or creativity or persistence, is developing those qualities in exactly the way that comfortable conditions never could. Epictetus does not romanticize adversity. He does not suggest that difficulty is pleasant or that the suffering that accompanies genuine obstacles should be dismissed as insignificant. He is making a more precise and more useful point. He is saying that the quality of your response to the obstacle determines whether the obstacle develops you or diminishes you. The obstacle itself is neutral. It is a set of conditions. What you do with those conditions, the judgment you bring to them, the inner resources you bring to bear on them, the character you choose to express in response to them, is entirely within your genuine control. And the person who responds to every obstacle with the full commitment of their genuine inner resources, who refuses to be diminished by difficulty, and insists on finding within every adverse condition the specific opportunity for development that it contains, is the person whose character grows consistently through every experience life presents. While the person who experiences obstacles primarily as evidence of life's unfairness, who invests their energy in resentment and resistance rather than genuine response, is diminished by the very experiences that could have developed them. The obstacle does not determine the outcome. The response does. Epictetus also addresses something about adversity that most people discover only after the fact. He says that the experiences people most frequently identify as the most formative and most meaningful of their lives are almost never the comfortable ones. They are the difficult ones. The losses, the failures, the unexpected reversals, the periods of genuine struggle that demanded something more than what was comfortably available. Looking back, people recognize these as the experiences that developed what they most value in themselves. Looking forward at adversity, the recognition is rarely so clear. In the moment, the obstacle simply feels like an obstacle. But the Stoic practice is to develop the capacity to recognize, even in the midst of difficulty and without waiting for the retrospective clarity, what the obstacle is actually offering, what quality it is developing, what capacity it is building, what the next version of yourself looks like on the other side of a genuine and fully committed response to what is being asked of you right now. The obstacle is the way. It always was discipline of action. Understanding is not enough. This is perhaps the most important thing Epictetus ever said. And it is the thing that separates the person who studies Stoic philosophy and feels inspired by it from the person who actually lives it and is transformed by it. You can understand the dichotomy of control perfectly. You can articulate the distinction between things up to you and things not up to you with complete precision. You can follow every argument in this book and find yourself in genuine agreement with every principle. And none of it will change anything about your actual life unless it is translated into action, into the specific, concrete, daily choices about how you actually behave in the actual circumstances of your actual existence. Epictetus was not interested in producing philosophers. He was interested in producing people who lived well, and living well in his understanding was not a theoretical achievement, it was a practical one, measured not by the sophistication of your understanding, but by the quality of your daily conduct. The discipline of action is the bridge between understanding and living. It is the practice of bringing the principles into contact with the specific choices and behaviors of ordinary daily life. Of asking in each situation, not merely what do I believe, but what does what I believe actually require of me right now. Epictetus describes this discipline in terms of 3 specific commitments that govern genuinely Stoic action. The first is the commitment to act always in accordance with your genuine values rather than in accordance with impulse or habit or the desire for approval. Most people act from one of these 3 far more often than they act from genuine values. The impulse of the moment feels urgent and compelling. The habit is comfortable and familiar. The desire for approval is constant and powerful. Values require the additional step of conscious choice. of pausing between impulse and action long enough to ask whether what you are about to do reflects who you genuinely intend to be. That pause is the discipline. It is small. It is unglamorous. It requires no special circumstance or special capacity. It is simply the consistent practice of bringing awareness to the space between stimulus and response, and choosing deliberately from that space rather than reacting automatically from below it. The second commitment is to act with full effort while holding outcomes lightly. To bring genuine commitment and genuine energy to everything you undertake while maintaining the inner clarity that the outcome is not fully within your control, and therefore not the legitimate measure of the quality of your effort or the quality of your character. This is one of the most difficult balances in practical Stoicism, because genuine commitment requires genuine investment, and genuine investment creates genuine attachment to outcomes. The Stoic practice is not to eliminate that attachment entirely, but to hold it at the right level. To care enough to give everything the effort genuinely deserves, while caring wisely enough not to make your inner stability conditional on the result. The third commitment is to act consistently. Not heroically in occasional dramatic moments, but ordinarily in the accumulated small choices of daily life. Because character is not built in the exceptional moments. It is built in the ordinary ones. In the thousand small decisions that nobody else notices, and that seem individually insignificant, but that collectively constitute the actual texture of who you are and how you live. Epictetus returns to this point repeatedly throughout his teaching, because it is the point most often missed by people who are genuinely attracted to Stoic philosophy, but find that it does not seem to change their actual experience. The philosophy does not change your experience. Your actions change your experience. The philosophy simply tells you which actions to take. Take them, not occasionally, not when it is convenient or when the circumstances are favorable or when you feel sufficiently inspired. Daily, consistently. In the ordinary moments that make up most of a human life. That is where Stoicism lives, not in the books, in the choices. The inner citadel. There is a place inside you that nothing can touch, not failure, not loss. Not the cruelty of others, or the indifference of circumstance, or the thousand ways the world can strip away everything you thought was essential to your well-being. Not illness, not poverty, not humiliation or defeat or the collapse of everything you worked toward. Nothing can touch it. Not because it is defended by force, not because it is protected by wealth or power or the favorable arrangement of outer circumstances, but because it is, by its very nature, beyond the reach of everything that exists outside you. Epictetus called it the inner citadel. The fortress of your own rational mind, your own capacity for genuine judgment, your own freedom to choose your response to whatever arrives, your own inner conviction about what is true and what is valuable and what kind of person you intend to be regardless of what the outer world is doing. This is the territory that is entirely and unconditionally yours. The only territory that has ever been entirely and unconditionally yours. And the tragedy of most human lives is not that this territory is small or weak or insufficient. It is that most people never discover it. They spend their entire lives focused entirely on the outer world, on managing conditions and acquiring things and securing approval and avoiding loss. And they never turn inward long enough to find the one place where genuine freedom actually lives. Epictetus had discovered this place from the inside of slavery. He understood it in a way that people with comfortable outer circumstances rarely have occasion to understand. When everything external has been taken, when the outer world offers nothing that can be relied upon, the question of whether there is anything left that is genuinely yours becomes not a philosophical exercise but a survival question, and his answer was yes. There is always something left. Something that cannot be taken because it was never in the hands of anyone else to begin with. The rational mind, the capacity for judgment, the freedom of genuine response, these are the contents of the inner citadel, and they are not diminished by outer loss. They are, if anything, clarified by it. When the outer distractions are stripped away, the inner reality becomes more visible, not less. The practical work of Stoic philosophy is the work of building and maintaining this inner citadel, of strengthening the rational mind through consistent practice of genuine judgment, of developing the capacity to return to the inner territory quickly and reliably when outer circumstances pull attention away from it, of making the inner citadel not an occasional refuge, but the consistent home from which all outer engagement proceeds. This does not mean withdrawal from the outer world. Epictetus was not advocating for a life of inner retreat disconnected from genuine engagement with the circumstances and people of daily life. The inner citadel is not a hiding place. It is a foundation, the stable ground from which full and genuine outer engagement becomes possible without the fragility that comes from having no stable ground at all. The person who has built genuine inner stability, who has genuinely developed the capacity to return quickly to their own rational judgment regardless of what the outer world is doing, is more capable of genuine outer engagement, not less. Because they are not constantly managing the anxiety of someone whose peace depends on outer conditions cooperating. They can give their full attention to what is actually in front of them, rather than spending half of it managing their own inner fragility. Epictetus closes this chapter with an observation that cuts to the heart of everything. He says that the person who understands the inner citadel has nothing to fear from the outer world. Not because the outer world has become safe or predictable or reliably favorable, but because what the outer world can do to them and what can actually harm them are no longer the same thing. The outer world can change your circumstances. It cannot change who you are. Unless you let it. Contentment. Most people have a plan for happiness. It goes something like this. When I have enough money, I will be content. When the relationship is right, I will be content. When the career reaches the level I am working toward, when the circumstances settle into the configuration I have been arranging, when the outer world finally cooperates with what I need from it, then I will be content. This plan has one fatal flaw: it has never worked. Not for anyone. Not in any era, not in any circumstances. The conditions for contentment are always just ahead. Always one more achievement, one more acquisition, one more favorable change in outer conditions away. And the moment any particular condition is reached, the goalposts shift. The mind finds a new condition to require before contentment can finally begin. This is not a personal failure. It is the predictable result of looking for contentment in the wrong place. Epictetus identified the wrong place with precision. It is outside you, in the conditions of the outer world, in the arrangement of circumstances that you do not fully control, and that will never remain stable long enough to provide the reliable foundation for inner peace that you are asking them to provide. And he identified the right place with equal precision. It is inside you, in the quality of your own judgments, in the clarity of your own values, in the genuine alignment between how you are living and what you actually believe matters. In the recognition, deepening through consistent practice, that the inner territory is sufficient. That what is genuinely yours is genuinely enough. This is what Epictetus means by contentment. Not the passive acceptance of whatever conditions life presents. Not the abandonment of genuine aspiration or the pretense that nothing could be better. But the genuine inner recognition that your well-being does not require any particular outer condition in order to be real and present right now. This distinction matters enormously in practice. The person who is working toward meaningful goals from a foundation of genuine inner contentment is completely different in their experience of that work from the person who is working toward meaningful goals as a condition of their eventual contentment. The first person is already well. They are working because genuine effort and genuine contribution are expressions of a life lived fully rather than conditions yet to be met. The second person is not yet well and will not be until the goal is reached. which means they are spending the majority of their life in a state of incomplete well-being waiting for a future condition to make them whole. Epictetus prescribes a specific practice for developing genuine contentment that is both simple and demanding. It begins with attention. Specifically with the deliberate direction of attention toward what is already present and already good rather than toward what is absent and desired. Not as a denial of genuine aspiration, but as the consistent practice of recognizing the actual value of what is already here before moving attention to what is not yet here. Most people's attention moves almost entirely in the direction of what is lacking, what is not yet achieved, what has not yet arrived. The gap between present conditions and desired conditions occupies the foreground of daily awareness, while the genuine good that is already present recedes into the background. And a mind focused on the gap experiences the gap, continuously and vividly. Regardless of how objectively favorable the actual conditions of life may be, redirecting attention toward what is genuinely present, genuinely good, and genuinely available right now is not wishful thinking. It is the correction of a perceptual distortion that most people carry without ever examining it. The life you are living right now contains more genuine good than the habitual focus on the gap allows you to see it, not instead of working toward more, but before, and alongside, and after. Contentment is not the reward for achieving enough. It is the practice of recognizing what is already sufficient virtue as the only good you have been lied to about what actually matters, not maliciously, not deliberately, but consistently and thoroughly from the very beginning of your life. By the culture around you, by the values you absorbed before you were old enough to examine them, by the implicit message carried in almost every advertisement, every success story, every measure of achievement that the world around you recognizes and rewards. The lie goes like this. What matters is what you have, what you achieve, what you earn, accumulate, accomplish, and are recognized for. Your worth is measured by the quality of your outer conditions. Your success is defined by what you can show. Your life is going well when the visible markers of a good life are present, and going badly when they are absent. Epictetus spent his entire life dismantling this lie, not because outer achievement is worthless, but because treating it as the primary measure of a human life produces a particular kind of suffering that has no remedy as long as the lie remains in place. Because outer conditions fluctuate. They arrive and they disappear. They can be built over decades and destroyed in moments. Anchoring your sense of living well to something so inherently unstable is a guarantee of instability. Epictetus offers a completely different measure. Virtue is the only genuine good, not the only pleasant thing, not the only thing worth pursuing in any sense, but the only thing whose possession constitutes genuine and reliable human flourishing. The only good that cannot be taken by any change in outer circumstances. The only achievement that remains fully yours regardless of what the world does. By virtue, Epictetus does not mean a list of moral rules to follow. He means something more fundamental and more demanding. The genuine excellence of the rational mind fully engaged with life. The consistent expression of wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline in the actual choices and actions of daily existence. The quality of a human being who is genuinely and consistently being what a human being is capable of being at their best. This is not an occasional achievement. It is not a peak state reached in moments of inspiration and then lost in the ordinary hours. It is a practice. A daily, consistent, unglamorous practice of bringing the full quality of genuine human excellence to the specific circumstances of your specific life as it actually is. Epictetus makes a distinction here that carries enormous practical weight. He separates things that are genuinely good from things that are merely preferred. Wealth is preferred over poverty. Health is preferred over illness. Friendship is preferred over isolation. These preferences are natural and reasonable, and Epictetus does not ask you to eliminate them. He asks you to hold them correctly, as preferences rather than as goods. as things worth pursuing through legitimate means, while recognizing that their presence or absence does not determine whether you are living genuinely well. Virtue is not preferred. It is good. Its presence genuinely constitutes flourishing. Its absence genuinely constitutes a failure of human life, regardless of what outer conditions are present. A person of great wealth and poor character is not living well in any sense that Epictetus would recognize. A person of genuine virtue and difficult outer circumstances is living well in the only sense that ultimately matters. This reorientation is not easy. It runs against almost everything the surrounding culture reinforces. But it is the reorientation that makes genuine inner freedom possible. Because once virtue is genuinely understood as the primary good, the anxiety about outer conditions loses its grip. Not because outer conditions stop mattering, but because they stop being the measure of whether life is going well, and that changes everything. What you are is always within your control. What you have never fully is. Choose accordingly freedom. Every human being wants to be free, not just politically, not just economically. Free in the deepest sense. Free from the constant anxiety of managing outer conditions that will not stay managed. Free from the exhausting performance of being whoever the current audience requires. Free from the invisible chains of other people's opinions and the self-imposed chains of your own unexamined fears. This kind of freedom is what every person is actually searching for beneath every other search. Beneath the search for money and status and love and achievement and security. The thing all of those are supposed to deliver. The inner condition of genuine ease and genuine self-possession that most people spend their entire lives pursuing through means that cannot produce it. Epictetus understood this search from a position that most people will never occupy. He was a slave. He had no political freedom, no economic freedom, no freedom of movement or association or choice about how his time and his labor would be used. Every outer condition of freedom was absent from his life for years. And from within those conditions, he arrived at a quality of inner freedom so complete and so genuinely independent of outer circumstances, that his teachings on the subject carry an authority that the comfortable and the free can rarely match. His understanding of freedom is precise and demands careful attention. Freedom is not the absence of outer constraints. It is the absence of inner ones. The person whose peace depends on outer conditions cooperating is not free regardless of how favorable those conditions currently are. They are in a prison whose walls happen to be made of pleasant circumstances rather than harsh ones. The prison is just as real. The moment those circumstances change, and they always change, the walls become visible. The person whose peace is grounded in their own genuine inner resources, in the quality of their own judgment and the consistency of their own character, is free regardless of how constrained their outer circumstances may be. Because nothing in the outer world has the power to take what they are depending on, it is entirely within their own custody. Epictetus identifies the specific inner chains that most people carry without recognizing them as chains. The first is the chain of desire. Specifically, the desire for things outside your genuine control. When your contentment requires a specific outer condition, that condition owns you. You are not free in relation to it. You are dependent on it. And dependence is the opposite of freedom regardless of how pleasant the thing you are dependent on may be. The second is the chain of aversion. The things you are so determined to avoid that your inner life is organized around avoiding them. Fear of failure, fear of poverty, fear of disapproval. Fear of loss. Each of these fears is a chain, because you are not free in relation to anything you are desperately trying to avoid. Your attention, your energy, your decisions are all shaped by the avoidance. The feared thing controls you through the fear even when it is not present. The third is the chain of opinion, the need to be seen in a particular way by particular people. The adjustment of your genuine self to match the requirements of whatever audience is currently watching. This chain is perhaps the most invisible and the most pervasive. Because it operates constantly and quietly in the background of almost every social interaction most people have. Epictetus does not offer freedom as a destination to be reached through a particular sequence of steps. He offers it as the natural result of a particular quality of understanding genuinely applied. When you genuinely understand what is and is not within your control, when that understanding reaches the level of genuine inner conviction rather than remaining an interesting idea, the chains begin to loosen on their own, not all at once. Not permanently after a single insight, but progressively. Reliably. In direct proportion to the depth and the consistency of the understanding, freedom is already yours in principle. The work is making it yours in practice integrity. There is a version of yourself that you present to the world, and there is the version that exists when nobody is watching. For most people, these two versions are not identical. There is a gap between the self that is performed for an audience and the self that operates in private. Between the values that are claimed in conversation and the values that actually govern behavior when there is no social consequence for behaving otherwise. Between who you say you are and who you actually are when the pressure of observation is removed. Epictetus considered this gap the single most important problem in a human life, not because hypocrisy is morally shameful, though he considered it that as well, but because the gap itself is a source of constant inner friction that most people carry so habitually that they have stopped noticing it. The energy required to maintain two versions of yourself, to manage the performance of the public self while suppressing the reality of the private self, is energy that is not available for anything else. It is a tax paid continuously on every interaction and every decision. And the inner cost goes beyond energy. The person who lives with a significant gap between their public values and their private behavior cannot trust themselves. Not in the deepest sense. Because they know, at some level they cannot entirely silence, that their stated values are not reliable predictors of their actual choices. That when genuine pressure arrives, when the cost of integrity becomes real rather than merely hypothetical, the performance may not hold. This inner uncertainty about your own reliability is one of the most corrosive forces in human psychology. It undermines confidence not by attacking it directly, but by removing its foundation. Genuine confidence is grounded in genuine self-knowledge. In the honest recognition that you are the kind of person who does what they say and says what they mean and behaves consistently with their values whether or not anyone is watching. That foundation cannot be built on performance. It can only be built on actual consistency of character. Epictetus prescribes something that sounds simple and is genuinely demanding. Be the same person in private that you are in public. Apply the same standards to your behavior when the audience is absent that you apply when it is present. Make your inner life and your outer presentation not two things to be managed in relation to each other, but one thing expressed consistently regardless of context. This is integrity in its most fundamental sense, not a moral virtue to be added to a list of desirable qualities. The foundation from which genuine character is built, and from which everything else of genuine value in a human life actually grows. Epictetus also addresses something about integrity that most discussions of the subject miss. He says that integrity is not primarily about dramatic moments of moral choice. It is not primarily tested in the exceptional circumstances where the right thing to do is obvious and the only question is whether you have the courage to do it. It is built and maintained in the ordinary moments. In the small daily choices that seem individually insignificant, but that collectively constitute the actual texture of who you are, whether you tell a small truth or a small lie when a small lie is convenient. Whether you keep a minor commitment when breaking it would be easy and undetected. Whether you apply your stated values to a situation where applying them costs you something real or only to situations where applying them costs you nothing. These small choices are not small in their cumulative effect. They are the material from which character is actually constructed. The person who consistently chooses integrity in the small moments has built something genuine and reliable by the time the large moments arrive. The person who consistently makes exceptions in the small moments has built nothing that will hold when it matters most. Be consistent. Be the same. In public and in private. In the large moments and the small ones. When it costs you something and when it costs you nothing, that consistency is integrity. And integrity is the foundation of everything worth building. Anger and emotion. Anger feels righteous in the moment. That is what makes it so dangerous. When anger arrives, it brings with it a powerful sense of justification, a feeling of absolute clarity about who is wrong and who has been wronged, a certainty that the intensity of the feeling is proportional to the seriousness of the offense, that the heat rising inside you is simply the appropriate response to what just happened, that anyone reasonable would feel exactly the same way. Epictetus examined this feeling of righteousness with the precision it deserves. And what he found beneath it was not the reliable moral compass that anger presents itself as, but a judgment. A rapid, largely automatic, frequently inaccurate assessment of what happened, what it means, and what response it deserves. And like every judgment, subject to examination. Subject to the question of whether it is actually accurate, whether it is serving you, whether it is the only possible interpretation of what occurred. He begins with a simple observation. Anger is always about the past or the present. It is a response to something that has already happened or is currently happening. And the thing that has already happened cannot be changed by the anger. The anger does not undo the offense, does not reverse the damage, does not make the person who acted badly act differently. It simply adds your own disturbance to a situation that already contains enough disturbance. This does not mean that genuine wrongs should be met with indifference. Epictetus is not advocating for passive acceptance of everything that arrives. He is making a precise point about the instrument. Anger is a poor instrument for addressing genuine wrongs because it operates from disturbance rather than from clarity. And disturbance produces responses that are reactive rather than genuinely considered. That feel satisfying in the moment, but frequently make the underlying situation worse rather than better. The alternative Epictetus offers is not the suppression of emotion, not the pretense of indifference when genuine feeling is present, but the development of a different relationship with emotion, one in which feeling is acknowledged without being immediately acted upon, in which the space between the arising of the emotion and the response to the situation is large enough to allow genuine judgment to operate. He speaks of the practice of pausing, of creating even a brief interval between the provocation and the response, not to suppress what is felt, but to prevent the feeling from bypassing judgment entirely and producing a response that the reflective mind would not endorse. In that pause, something becomes possible that is not possible in the heat of immediate reaction. The question of what actually happened can be asked honestly. The judgment that produced the anger can be examined for accuracy. The question of what response would actually serve the situation, as opposed to what response the anger is demanding, can be genuinely considered. Most of the time, what emerges from that honest examination is a more measured and more genuinely effective response than the anger was producing. Not because the underlying concern was not legitimate, but because the response is now coming from clarity rather than from disturbance. Epictetus also addresses something about anger specifically that carries particular practical weight. He says that most anger is about things in the category of what is not up to you, about other people's behavior, about the failure of outer conditions to cooperate, about the gap between how things are and how you need them to be. And as we established in the very first chapter of this book, investing your inner life in things not up to you is the primary source of unnecessary suffering. Anger at what is not up to you is energy spent on something you cannot change through that spending. It is a real cost with no genuine return, Redirect that energy toward what is actually up to you, toward your response. Your judgment. Your choice about how to engage with the situation as it actually is rather than as your anger insists it should not be. That energy, redirected, builds something. The anger, indulged, only burns time and mortality. You are going to die, not eventually. Not someday in the abstract future that feels safely distant from the present moment. You are going to die, and the people you love are going to die. And everything you are currently building and protecting and working toward will one day be gone. The timeline is uncertain. The fact is not. Most people know this, and most people spend enormous energy not thinking about it. Constructing elaborate psychological defenses against the full weight of this reality. Keeping it at the periphery of awareness where it can be acknowledged in the abstract without being genuinely felt in the specific. Epictetus thought it should be felt in the specific. Daily, not from morbidity. Not from a desire to cultivate despair or to diminish the value of life and its pursuits, but from the clear-eyed recognition that genuine engagement with the fact of mortality is one of the most powerful tools available for the clarification of what actually matters, for the elimination of the trivial, for the concentration of genuine attention and genuine energy on what is real and what is valuable and what is actually worth the irreplaceable time of a finite human life. The Stoics practiced what they called memento mori, the deliberate and regular contemplation of death, not as a spiritual exercise disconnected from practical life, as a practical tool for keeping the priorities of a finite existence genuinely in focus, rather than allowing the urgent but trivial demands of daily life to crowd out the important but patient demands of genuine living. Epictetus applies this practice with characteristic precision. He says that when you kiss your child goodnight, remind yourself that this child is mortal, not to produce anxiety or to diminish the joy of the moment, but to deepen it. Because the person who genuinely holds the mortality of those they love is the person who is actually present with them, who is not taking the moment for granted, who understands that this particular moment of this particular relationship is genuinely irreplaceable and will not come again. The contemplation of mortality does not diminish love, it clarifies it. It strips away the assumption of infinite future opportunity and reveals the actual value of the present moment with a vividness that comfortable certainty never produces. He applies the same practice to time itself. Most people treat time as though it is in infinite supply. They postpone the genuine engagements of their lives to a future that feels more suitable. When circumstances improve, when the pressures ease, when there is more time, more money, more space, the genuine conversation is deferred, the genuine effort is postponed. The genuine expression of what actually matters is reserved for a future that the present is supposed to be preparing for. Epictetus says this future is a fiction. There is only now. The present moment is the only moment in which life actually occurs. The past is memory. The future is imagination. The only place where genuine living is possible is here, in this specific moment, with these specific people, in these specific circumstances. The person who genuinely holds this understanding does not defer the genuine engagements of their life. They do not save their full presence for a more convenient future. They bring what they have in full to what is actually in front of them right now, because they understand that right now is all there ever is. And that understanding, genuinely held, is perhaps the most clarifying and the most liberating of all the practices in this book. You have a finite amount of time. You do not know how much. Use it as though you knew it was precious, because it is. Every moment of it, without exception. Simplicity, the most powerful lives are rarely the most complicated ones. Look carefully at the people throughout history who have produced the most genuine and the most lasting impact, who have lived with the most consistent sense of genuine purpose and genuine inner freedom, who have contributed most meaningfully to the lives of others and to the larger human story. They are almost never the people with the most complex arrangements of outer conditions, the most elaborate systems of acquisition and management. The most sophisticated strategies for securing every possible advantage and protecting against every possible loss. They are almost always the people who have learned to want less, to need less, to find the full expression of genuine living within a simpler and more deliberate relationship with the conditions of existence. Epictetus lived this understanding from necessity, and found in it a freedom that most people who have lived in luxury never discover. As a slave, he had almost nothing. No property, no comfort beyond the most basic, no outer conditions that would by any conventional measure be described as favorable to genuine flourishing. And from within those conditions, he developed a quality of inner life that his students, many of whom were wealthy and powerful Romans, found so extraordinary that they traveled considerable distances to learn from him. What they found was not someone who had made peace with deprivation by lowering his expectations of life. They found someone who had discovered that the expectations most people carry about what outer conditions are necessary for genuine well-being are almost entirely wrong. Simplicity, in Epictetus's understanding, is not poverty. It is not the absence of comfort or the rejection of everything pleasant. It is the deliberate and conscious reduction of your requirements. The progressive elimination of the conditions you have decided you need before genuine living can begin. Most people carry an enormous and largely unexamined list of requirements. The house must be a certain size. The income must reach a certain level. The career must achieve a certain recognition. The relationships must provide a certain kind of support. The body must look and feel a certain way. And beneath all of these specific requirements is the general conviction that life as it currently is, in its actual present configuration, is not quite sufficient for genuine contentment. That sufficiency is always slightly ahead, waiting for one more condition to be met. Epictetus says this conviction is the problem, not the conditions. The conviction, because the conditions will always be imperfect. There will always be something that has not yet arrived or something that has arrived but is not quite right. The requirement-based approach to contentment has no natural end point. It generates new requirements as old ones are met with the same reliability that appetite generates new hunger after eating. The alternative is not the abandonment of genuine aspiration. It is the development of a different relationship with what you currently have. The practice of genuine attention to what is already present and already sufficient. The deliberate reduction of the gap between what you have and what you have decided you need. Epictetus prescribes this as a practice rather than a philosophy. Not just understanding simplicity as an idea, but actually living more simply. Actually reducing the outer requirements. Actually discovering through direct experience how little is genuinely necessary for a life that is rich in the ways that actually matter. What he found, and what every person who has genuinely practiced this discovers, is that the reduction of outer requirements does not diminish life. It clarifies it. It removes the noise and the distraction of managing complexity that was never genuinely necessary, and reveals the genuine value of what remains. Less management of conditions means more genuine presence with what is actually here. Less pursuit of what is not yet present means more genuine engagement with what already is. Less requirement means more freedom. It always works in that direction. Always daily practice philosophy without practice is entertainment. It produces the pleasant feeling of having understood something important. The temporary sense of clarity that comes from encountering a genuinely good idea and recognizing its truth. The comfortable conviction that your understanding of how to live has improved significantly. And then daily life resumes. The same patterns reassert themselves. The same reactions arise in the same situations. The same fears and the same habits and the same automatic responses that were operating before the encounter with the philosophy continue operating after it. Because understanding an idea and living an idea are two completely different things. And the distance between them is not crossed by more understanding, it is crossed by practice. Epictetus was unambiguous about this. He did not consider himself primarily a philosopher in the academic sense. He considered himself a teacher of a practice, a trainer of the human character in the same sense that a physical trainer works with the human body. And he understood, as every genuine trainer understands, that the work is in the repetition. In the daily, consistent, unglamorous application of the principles to the actual circumstances of actual life. The Stoic practice, as Epictetus described it, consists of 3 daily disciplines that work together as a complete system of inner development. The first is the discipline of desire and aversion, the daily practice of examining what you are wanting and what you are avoiding and ensuring that both are directed toward things that are genuinely within your control. This is not a practice you complete once and then consider finished. It is a daily examination, a consistent returning to the question of where your desire and your aversion are actually pointed, and whether that pointing is serving the quality of your inner life or undermining it. The second is the discipline of action, the daily practice of acting in accordance with your genuine values rather than from impulse or habit or the desire for approval, of bringing conscious intention to the choices that most people make automatically, of asking in each situation that calls for a response, not merely what do I feel like doing, but what does genuine excellence actually require of me here. The third is the discipline of judgment, the daily practice of examining the assessments you are making about the events and people and circumstances of your life, of questioning the automatic interpretations that arise without examination, of asking whether the judgment that produced a particular emotional response is actually accurate, whether it is the only possible interpretation of what occurred, whether a different and more accurate judgment might produce a different and more genuinely useful response. These 3 disciplines are not separate practices to be applied in different contexts. They are 3 aspects of a single continuous practice of inner attention that runs through the entire day, not consuming all of your attention, not requiring constant effortful introspection, but providing a consistent background quality of genuine self-awareness that allows the principles to operate in the actual moments of actual life, rather than only in moments of deliberate philosophical reflection. Epictetus also prescribes specific bookend practices for the day. In the morning, before the day's activity begins, a brief period of deliberate preparation, a conscious review of the principles, a genuine inner commitment to bringing the quality of Stoic practice to whatever the day presents, not a lengthy ritual. A genuine moment of deliberate orientation toward the kind of person you intend to be in the hours ahead. In the evening, a brief period of honest review. Not harsh self-judgment, honest examination. 3 questions applied to the day just past. Where did I act well? Where did I fall short? What would genuine excellence have looked like in the moments where I fell short? This evening practice is not about accumulating guilt. It is about learning, about the progressive refinement of understanding through honest contact with the gap between principle and practice. The gap is always present. The practice is always imperfect. The point is not perfection. The point is the direction of genuine effort applied consistently over time. Small daily practice, consistently maintained, builds everything that matters. The practicing Stoic, there is a difference between knowing Stoicism and being a Stoic. The knowing is easy. The ideas are clear. The logic is compelling. The principles make immediate sense to anyone who encounters them with genuine attention. You can read this book in a single sitting and understand every argument Epictetus makes. You can articulate the dichotomy of control with precision. You can explain the discipline of judgment and the inner citadel and the practice of memento mori to anyone who asks. And you can do all of this while your actual daily life remains essentially unchanged, because knowing is not being. Understanding is not practicing. The map is not the territory. And the distance between the philosophical understanding of how to live and the actual living of that understanding is the distance that separates the student who is entertained by Stoicism from the person who is genuinely transformed by it. Epictetus was relentless on this point. He had no patience for students who came to philosophy as a form of intellectual entertainment, who collected ideas the way others collect possessions, who could debate the principles with sophistication and precision, and then walk out of the classroom and behave in ways that bore no relationship to what they had just been discussing. He said that the sign of genuine philosophical progress is not the increasing sophistication of your arguments. It is the decreasing frequency with which you blame others for your inner states, the decreasing urgency of your need for things outside your control, the increasing consistency with which your actual behavior reflects your stated values rather than your habitual impulses. These are behavioral measures, not intellectual ones. They are visible in the actual texture of a life rather than in the quality of its theoretical commitments. The practicing Stoic is not someone who has achieved perfection in these measures. Epictetus never claimed to have achieved it himself and would have been deeply suspicious of anyone who did. The practicing Stoic is someone who is genuinely and consistently working on them, who takes the morning preparation and the evening review seriously enough to actually do them, who brings the three disciplines into genuine contact with the actual circumstances of their actual day rather than only invoking them in moments of deliberate reflection, who notices when anger arises and pauses before responding, who catches the movement of desire toward something outside genuine control and consciously redirects it, who examines the judgment that produced a disturbance rather than simply indulging the disturbance as though it were an accurate response to the objective situation, not perfectly, not consistently from the beginning, but genuinely, with the patient consistency of someone who understands that character is built in the daily practice rather than in the occasional dramatic moment of moral clarity. Epictetus also addresses something about the social dimension of Stoic practice that is worth careful attention. He says that the practicing Stoic does not advertise their practice, does not correct others, does not position themselves as philosophically superior to the people around them who are not practicing in the same way. This kind of philosophical performance is itself a failure of the practice. It is using philosophy in the service of exactly the kind of status-seeking and approval-seeking that Stoicism exists to free you from. The genuine practice is quiet. It shows itself not in what you say about your values, but in what you actually do when your values are tested. In how you respond when someone treats you badly. In how you handle loss and disappointment and the failure of outer conditions to cooperate. In the quality of genuine steadiness that develops over time in someone who is actually doing the work rather than performing it. Epictetus closes this chapter with a thought that serves as both an encouragement and a challenge. He says that every person who has ever developed genuine inner freedom developed it through exactly this kind of daily, unglamorous practice. Not through a dramatic moment of transformation. Not through the arrival of perfect circumstances, but through the patient, consistent, daily application of genuine principle to the actual circumstances of an actual human life. That path is available to you. It has always been available. It begins exactly where you are right now. The Stoic and the world Stoicism is sometimes misunderstood as a philosophy of withdrawal, of turning inward so completely that the outer world becomes irrelevant, of developing such thorough detachment from circumstances and people and outcomes that genuine engagement with any of them becomes impossible, of becoming, in the pursuit of inner freedom, someone who is technically free but practically useless, present in body but absent in genuine investment in anything beyond their own inner state. This misunderstanding is almost the complete opposite of what Epictetus actually taught. The inner freedom that Stoic practice develops is not the freedom of someone who has stopped caring. It is the freedom of someone who can care fully without being destroyed by the inevitable fluctuations of what they care about. who can engage completely without making their inner stability conditional on the engagement going as hoped, who can give everything to a relationship or a project or a cause while maintaining the inner clarity that the outcome is not fully within their control, and therefore not the legitimate measure of their worth or their peace. This quality of engaged detachment, of full investment without desperate attachment, is not a diminished form of human engagement. It is a more sustainable and ultimately more effective form of it. Because the person whose inner stability depends on outcomes tends to become risk-averse as the stakes increase, tends to hold back genuine commitment in order to protect themselves from the full weight of potential disappointment, tends to engage less completely precisely in the situations that most deserve complete engagement. The Stoic, whose inner stability is grounded in what is genuinely up to them rather than in how things turn out, can give more completely, can take greater risks with genuine equanimity, can engage more fully with difficult and uncertain situations precisely because the difficulty and the uncertainty do not threaten the foundation of their inner life. Epictetus is also clear about the Stoics' obligations to others. The development of inner freedom is not a license for indifference to the well-being of the people around you. It is not permission to withdraw from the genuine responsibilities of human life in the name of philosophical development. The Stoic tradition from the beginning has been deeply concerned with the question of how to live well in relation to others, with justice, with genuine service, with the recognition that human beings are by nature social, and that genuine flourishing includes genuine contribution to the communities and relationships of which you are a part. Epictetus speaks of preferred indifference in this context. Things that are not in themselves genuinely good or bad, but that are worth pursuing or avoiding through legitimate means. Health, friendship, civic participation, genuine contribution to the people around you. These are preferred, worth pursuing, worth investing genuine energy and genuine care in. The Stoic pursues them, fully and genuinely, while maintaining the inner clarity that their presence or absence does not determine whether life is going genuinely well, that the quality of the pursuit matters more than the result of it, that genuine effort in the direction of genuine good is itself the achievement regardless of what outer conditions happen to follow from it. This combination of full outer engagement and genuine inner freedom is the distinctive contribution of Stoic philosophy to the question of how to live. Not withdrawal, not detachment in the sense of not caring, but the specific quality of engaged freedom that comes from knowing precisely what is and is not genuinely yours and investing your deepest resources only in what actually is. The world deserves your full engagement. You deserve the inner freedom that makes full engagement possible without inner destruction. Stoicism offers both, at the same time, in the same life. As the same practice, the final teaching, everything in this book has been pointing toward a single moment. Not a moment that arrives at the end of a long journey of philosophical development, not a moment that becomes available only after years of practice and decades of refinement, but a moment that is available right now, in this specific instant, in the actual present circumstances of your actual present life, the moment of genuine choice. The choice to begin living as though what Epictetus taught is actually true. Not as a philosophical proposition to be considered and evaluated and perhaps adopted at some future point when circumstances are more suitable, but as the operative reality of your inner life starting now, because this is where most people who encounter Stoic philosophy stop short. They understand it, they agree with it, they find it genuinely compelling. And then they defer the actual living of it to a more convenient future, when things settle down, when the current pressures ease. When there is more space and more time and more inner quiet for genuine philosophical practice. Epictetus would have recognized this deferral immediately, and he would have named it for what it actually is, not wisdom, not prudent timing, not the reasonable caution of someone who wants to get it right before fully committing, but the same avoidance of genuine inner work that the philosophy exists to address. The same preference for comfortable postponement over the genuine discomfort of actual change. The same investment in future conditions as the prerequisite for present engagement that Stoicism, from its very first principle, identifies as the source of unnecessary suffering. The philosophy does not become applicable when your circumstances improve. It becomes applicable the moment you decide to apply it, which is always now. Epictetus closes his teaching with a summary so direct and so complete that it requires no elaboration, only genuine attention and genuine commitment. Some things are up to you, some things are not. Focus your genuine energy and your genuine inner investment entirely on what is up to you. Hold everything else with the open hand of genuine preference rather than the tight fist of desperate requirement. Develop the quality of your own judgments. Maintain the integrity of your own character. Practice the three disciplines daily with genuine rather than performed commitment. Enter the inner citadel and learn to live from it rather than visiting it occasionally when outer conditions become unbearable. Do these things, not perfectly, not all at once, but genuinely, consistently. With the patient understanding that character is built in the daily practice, and that the daily practice, however imperfect, is always moving in the right direction as long as it is genuinely engaged, and discover what Epictetus discovered from within the conditions of slavery. What Marcus Aurelius discovered from within the conditions of empire. What every person who has genuinely engaged with this philosophy in the 2,000 years since it was first taught has discovered in their own particular circumstances. That genuine inner freedom is not a reward for favorable outer conditions. It is available right now, exactly as things are in the specific circumstances of your specific life as it actually exists in this specific moment, not later. Not when things improve. Not when the pressure eases and the space opens and the time finally arrives. Now, the teaching is complete, the practice begins here. What you do next is entirely up to you. And that, as Epictetus always said, is the only thing that ever actually mattered.